Down in the feet of iron and of clay, weak and divided, soon to pass away. What will the next great glorious drama be? Christ and his coming and eternity. Look for the waymarks, the great prophetic waymarks, down through the ages, past the kingdom's floor. Look for the waymarks, the great prophetic waymarks. The journey's almost o'er.
That's great. Heavenly gracious Father, when people come before you and ask for your blessing again, Father, as we delve into your word, we ask for a large portion of the Holy Spirit that it might speak the truth. We thank you for your great and beautiful Sabbath day that you've given us, Lord. We thank you for all things that you do and provide. And we pray in your holy and mighty name, in the name of Yeshua, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Okay, so back to the next one, looking at Raphia now, and where we ended off with is, I have an echo, am I supposed to? So we've been looking at the Battle of Ipsus from the perspective of Pyrrhus as king of the south. When we considered Ipsus, we found it was a battle between the last great general who was uniting Alexander's empire. That general was Antigonus, and his name means like the ancestor. I just want to point out what Sister Lisa brought up during the break, that there, it's kind of interesting, like I told you, that we all pick different things that we go and look up. It's hard to look up everything, every one of us individually. And so there are different things that'll strike me, I'll go look up and find more information on, or something that I question, I'll go look it up, because we do need to do that, but it's difficult to do it all the time. So she had looked up, when you break down the definition of anti being like, that it actually means against, opposite. So, but the word Antigonus itself means like the ancestor. So just wanted to make that correction. So the ancestor is Alexander the Great, so Antigonus equals Alexander the Great. We've learned that he had one eye, having lost one in a previous battle. We made the application that the eyes represent the two horns of the United States, republicanism and Protestantism. When Antigonus comes to the Battle of Ipsus, he only has one eye. It is a fully functioning eye, and there's nothing wrong with it, but he is blind in one eye. When we consider the horns in 2016, the United States has one horn. What happened to the other one? In 2016, what happened to the other horn? The Protestant horn was already broken, right? When they shut their doors in April of 1844. So I'm looking, I don't think she has the slideshow. Maybe it is the slideshow. Yeah, I think it is the slideshow for everybody. I want to make sure. But she might not advance you. She stepped out for a minute, so just in case, she'll catch up for those of you online. So they've already lost their Protestant horn, and in 2016, they still have their Republican horn. What happens in 2016? Hillary Clinton lost the election. And who represents Hillary Clinton? Or who does she represent? Antigonus. Antigonus was killed and the other eye was lost. We understood that to represent Clinton, But there's one other person in that battle fighting the same oppositional enemy, and that was Demetrius. What did we learn Demetrius means? The goddess Demeter. To practice saying all these words, because I'm probably going to say Antiochus all the time instead of Antiochus. So
You said that wrong in the Bible studies, and I got the.
yeah, because I get that. So I don't know. I might say it wrong, but as we go forward. So the goddess Demeter, what we take from that is the corn harvest. So it's related to harvest. Demetrius is an interesting personality, and his greatest weakness was that he did not have the respect of his people because of his behavior. He will be studied more later in the line of Pyrrhus. Demetrius represents who? When we saw that he represents Donald Trump from the harvest, we have these two parties, Antigonus and Demetrius, and they're not fighting for each other's territory. They're fighting for the territory of the three allies. And those three allies were Seleucus, Lysimachus, and Cassander. When we come to 2016, Clinton and Trump aren't fighting for each other's belongings. What they're fighting for is the government, distinct and separate. We understand that in this battle, Antigonus is killed. He's been undefeated for over 80 years. The last of the uniters of Alexander's empire. Demetrius becomes king, and a general of his, Pyrrhus, is undefeated. Pyrrhus is in alliance with Demetrius from another kingdom who's working for him. Who does Pyrrhus represent? King of the South, Putin. So that's pretty much review from the previous two studies because they've gone over it. And if you do back up through some of the other studies, and the notes are all available, you can see more building into what we've gone through. So we understand that Antigonus is killed by elephants. Seleucus returns from a battle from the east. He's gone all the way to India, and he's returning with around 400 to 500 war elephants. It's those war elephants that sever Antigonus from his army. We need to note that Antigonus is separated from his people. The elephants themselves don't kill him. They drive a wedge between him and his army, and he's killed in a hail of spears or arrows. Antigonus means like the ancestor. And when we see like, we can do a comparison. What we can do then is an alpha and omega. We have the beginning and the end. So if he's like the ancestor, you have the alpha, which is Alexander, and you have the omega, which is Antigonus. Antigonus is an empire builder. Alexander was an empire builder. And they're both building the Grecian Empire. They're like or compared to or the same person. So we can go from Washington to Clinton, and they're doing the same work, empire builders. And I did remove that off the board here, but it was on the board earlier. We had it on there with the alpha being Alexander, and it is in the notes as well. So, but I cleared the board from what was there previously. So we've considered the history of Ipsus, and we need to step back from the history of Pyrrhus, because when we consider this war between the King of the North and the King of the South, how did we first come across this history? I think we kind of touched on that just as a refresher. How did we first come across this history, and how did we first come across to understand this continuing war? In 2015, we believed that this King of the South was finished in 1989. And what light changed that the King of the South is going to resurrect? What story did we learn that from? We've been looking at Pyrrhus and Demetrius, Pyrrhus being the King of the South, and Demetrius the King of the North. We understood this in 2018. But in 2016, we saw a King of the South and a King of the North, Raphia and Panium. And who then is the King of the South and the King of the North? Ptolemy and Seleucus. These are the stories we have to construct this history. We're going to add another line, Stalin and Hitler. Our original story, when we came to understanding the King of the South and its return or resurrection, was through this story of Ptolemy and Seleucus. Where did we come to understand that? In 2016, the early verses of Daniel 11 began to be opened up in application. Everybody, I think, remembers that. I think that's about when you guys came in after that, I think. 2017, yeah. So when they first began to understand those verses, I say it's Wales, but I might be wrong.
Right. I think that's right.
Yeah. And then they went to Holland right after that. Yeah. So we particularly marked Daniel 11, 4-15 that really covered that history. It's those verses that give us the literal battle of Raphia and Panium. When we come to 2019 and say it's the Battle of Raphia, we're saying that because we saw that in the early verses of Daniel 11. And we're going to do, like she had said, we're going to walk backwards, starting at Panium, walking backwards through the verses to come to what began this battle to begin with. And after this study, I'm looking forward to the next one, because the stuff that she starts to say, I'm not all there yet myself, but I can start seeing pictures of it. And it's, anyway, so I'm anxious to get to the rest of it to continue on to see how that all lays out here. But before we go into Pyrrhus, further into Pyrrhus, we're going to go through Daniel 11 so we can understand those passages in the history of Seleucus and Ptolemy, beginning from the end and working backwards. So we read previously, just a little bit ago, Daniel 11, 13-15, and we're looking at what these are describing. We know that they're describing the Battle of Panium, and it's the literal Battle of Panium that was 200 BC. The king of the north is coming against the king of the south. So I did put it for those that are looking. I don't know if you want to get them on the board because they won't have it. I put everything there. It is in the notes. I'm not real good at trying to write and talk at the same time. I'll try to get better at it if that's what I need to be doing. But I put it all on there. So we're looking at 200 BC, the Battle of Panium here. And we're going to start breaking down who's at each place here and work our way backwards to see what began this battle. So if it says the king of the north sets forth a multitude greater than the former, what do we know? And I think we touched on that briefly. We can what can we understand? He's bringing a bigger army or a greater army, and then there must be a time when he brought a smaller army. We conclude from that, and just that's another way of knowing how, when you're breaking down verses, how you can put words in a verse that's not there, because they're alluding to something that happened previously. So that's why you know you can put something there that it doesn't say. Does that make sense? So you
read between the lines.
Yeah, yeah. So so we conclude from that they fought before. This isn't the first time that they fought in the Battle of Panium. It was Antiochus, right? I'm going to try to get used to saying it that way. Antiochus III, who was king of the Seleucid Empire. And for the Ptolemaic Empire, it was General Scopas of Aetolia. Why was a general fighting for the king of the south? Who was the king of the south at that time? Oh, yeah. Ptolemy was very young, too young to be leading an army.
Oh, yeah.
And so it is Scopas of Aetolia that fights for Ptolemy. Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire achieved a complete victory. He annihilated the Ptolemaic army. What did he win victory over? And what were they fighting over? And I don't know if you have the map. If you can go to the next one. Yeah, there you go. For the map there. And you guys, unless you can see her computer, I just put some maps on her. It helps me place things where we're looking at. Because it's, yeah. Oh, yeah, you guys have the picture of it too. So you guys have it, never mind, sorry. Hard to manage two things at the same time. And then that. So, okay. So, so what are they fighting over? Seleucus doesn't take Egypt, right? He didn't conquer Egypt. He didn't want Egypt. That wasn't the quarrel between them. They're not just fighting for the sake of fighting. Something has happened long ago that has turned these two men against each other. There's something that they both want, and it's not each other's empire. They're fighting over the area known as Coal Syria. They both want this strategic area. When they fight the Battle of Panium, it's over this area. This is what Antiochus wins at Panium. They've been fighting over that area for a long time. In all that there have been 6 Syrian wars. All the history we're talking about relates to these 6 Syrian wars. So you have them on the board, is that right? So for those that don't have notes, but it is on the screen, will be on the screen for them. But we've got the 6 Syrian wars here, and this 5th battle here is Panium of those 6 Syrian wars. They've been fighting over that area for a long time. There's been 6 Syrian wars. All the history we're talking of relates to these wars. Panium is the 5th. It finishes the 5th Syrian war. In that actual history, if you were a historian, you'd mark the end at Panium. But Daniel...
Says you wouldn't.
Yeah, I think I got it backwards.
Oh.
I think so. I might have to check that. Daniel does in chapter 11. Or he marks it as the end in chapter 11. He says that the 6th war is noise. And she goes on in other studies, we talked about that some before already, where she's talking about noise, where it's something that's there, but it doesn't pertain to the story and the point that we need to make. So Daniel marks the end in chapter 11. He says that the 6th war is noise. That when he takes that jump from your 1 king to the 4, or to 1 to the 4, he makes a jump there. So it's not really 2 empires fighting, because it's at Panium that Ptolemy is weakened. He's never able to become strong again as an empire. We need to locate ourselves in history that there are 6 Syrian wars, and we're marking the end of the 5th in Daniel 11. So, and that would be the end of the 5th Syrian war, marked in Daniel 11 in those verses. In the 6th war, Egypt isn't strong. One of the reasons we need to go through this history is to understand how we identify noise. Sometimes our studies are taught in such a way that the facts are laid out as application. And we say this in 1798, this is what the history tells us. Or we say this, this is what the history tells us. We don't realize how much we just accepted that as fact, when in that actual history, we can see that we've overlooked very much. We've completely ignored that there's another war. We've ignored that the king of the south doesn't fight at Panium as the head of his army, because he's only about 5 years old. I don't think I caught that until just now, but that's where you're talking about that battle. This battle here, Panium, that's where you have, I do know that, but I'm just connecting it a little differently, but that he's only 5 years old, so he's got a general fighting for him. So we need to think about that as what it's going to mean going forward. We need to become comfortable with this history we've already agreed with, because we've already bought into this story. And in this story, we've already overlooked a lot of information. This is an exercise before we go into the study of Pyrrhus. At the Battle of Panium, what does Seleucus win? Coal Syria. In some of the previous notes from the studies, if you guys go back through some of the previous notes, there are several of them that go through and talk about what's going on now currently, and the battles in it. It won't be fresh in my mind, but in those notes, the battles that are taking place now and why that battle is still over the same place. There's no new thing under the sun. Same place. So at the Battle of Panium, they want the territory of Coal Syria. And after Panium, Antiochus starts to prepare for war with Rome. We're also identifying a shift in Daniel 11 where it begins to introduce Rome in verse 14. Another reason it would identify the 6th war as noise. They have fought once before, and we found that battle in verses 11 and 12. And we saw that in those verses that it says that they're going to fight, bring a bigger army. So we know that they fought before, and that battle is verse 11 to 4. And the king of the south shall be moved with choler, and shall come against and fight with him, even with the king of the north. And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. And when he has taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it. So what battle is this? Verse 11 and 12, Raphia. If we're going to go into the actual history, this war between Seleucus and Ptolemy are known as the 6 Syrian wars. The story of Daniel 11 ends at the end of the 5th Syrian war. It ends the fight there with the Battle of Panium. But if you were to go to the history, there was one more war. We need to know what we mean when we're calling something noise. When we look at a history, we can see it's heavy with information. We've described it as a tree full of cherries, and that also was brought up in several studies before. Daniel Daniel is aware of this history, but yet he only marks from Alexander to down to the fourth, and going on to continue with the king of the north and the king of the south. So when we look at history, we can see it's heavy with information. We described it as a tree of cherries, full of cherries. The key to understanding that history is knowing which cherries you want to pick and which ones you want to leave. The example used most often is in Daniel 8:8. Therefore, the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. It's talking about a great king. And who is that great king? We all know now it's Alexander. It's speaking about Alexander, and it describes him as one horn. Then his kingdom is divided into many. Daniel doesn't give the entire history. He would say those 22 years are irrelevant to the model he wants to build. He skips 22 years and 4 wars, some very significant battles in history. He also skips dozens of generals, and the greatest general of all, Antigonus, he skips him entirely and goes to the 4 generals who weren't even Alexander's greatest generals. Cassander wasn't even a general of Alexander the Great. His father wasn't, and he took his father's kingdom. So we have all that history, and then he takes these 4 generals and 301 BC, and by the time you get to 287 BC, there's only 3 generals. It's a tiny little snapshot of history. Because he wants to teach us a certain lesson, he only picks the part of that history that he wants to draw our attention to. The rest is noise, or cherries, that we don't pick. So that 6th Syrian war is noise. We need to make the point also that it is logical, even in the history, to do that makes sense, depending on the story you're wanting to build. He skipped Antigonus, but Antigonus was the same as Alexander the Great. So if you want to mark the end of the empire, it would make sense to see that completed in 301 BC. As long as Antigonus is alive, that empire is not finally divided. What he is doing is reasonable depending on what perspective you want to look at that story. So he wants to make the point of going from the building of the empire to the end of the empire. But all the rest, if I'm understanding correctly, the rest is then left for our time to show us when it's time, what we need to know. That's the best way to say it, the right way to say that? To show us what we need to know when in our time. So the history in between is what is giving us line upon line to show us the battle between Antigonus and Demetrius against the 3 allies. Then you take Hitler and Stalin against the 3 allies that are then showing us. So that history is left for us to dig out, to pick those cherries for our time, weren't ripe yet. There you go. To make our point. So verse 11 and 12, the battle is Raphia, and it's 217 BC. And again, maybe I should stay over here, whatever you want me to do. Stay over here if you want me to. But so we're looking at 217 BC. We're looking at Raphia. And I don't know if I noted it's in the notes, but your Panium is verse 13 to 15. Raphia is 2019, and it's verse 11 to 12. It's 217 BC in history. This is a victory for the king of the south, and we can also read in those verses that after the king of the south wins that battle, his heart shall be lifted up. How do we understand that his heart shall be lifted up? What we identify in this verse is he attempts to desecrate a temple. In what history would we place that in? The king of the north and the king of the south fight at Raphia. The king of the south defeats the king of the north. His heart is lifted up, which means it's an exhibition of his pride. We need to note that we're marking a desecration of a temple. That will become more significant when we look at Pyrrhus, because we're going to go over the same history and application. What date do we mark as Raphia in application? And I just said it, but I think we all know 2019. It's from here backwards we can start making definite dates, marking definite dates. So Raphia is 2019. If we go to the history before this, we need to see a little bit of what is happening at this time. They meet at Raphia and fight this battle, and it was one of the largest battles ever fought in the ancient world. They're not fighting for each other's territory. This battle, like the others, is over whole Syria. And then we'll back up to verse 10. So we're working our way back to find out why the king of the north and the king of the south are in this battle. And remembering too, the point is going to come up that brought up in the last one, why I was confused why she said Seleucus, because I was forgetting what she says. It's actually his ancestors, the descendants of Seleucus that do these battles. So if we go, let's see, Daniel 11:10. But his sons shall be stirred up, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up, even to his fortress. What is this verse telling us? I thought I got better at my typos, but I've missed quite a few. We've identified in our histories the battles of Raphia and Panium, but we're going backwards in history to see why they're fighting in the first place. Our conclusion is back in this history. We need to come to understand why they're even fighting in the first place. It's like when you meet someone you don't like and you keep fighting because you're upset from something upset you 10 years ago. So something has happened that has turned these two into enemies, and they're fighting at Panium because they fought at Raphia. And they fought at Raphia because of something in this history. So this is another battle in verse 10. And what is this one describing? Verse 10. And if everybody remembers, because that was where one of the ones that was opened up back in 2016. Huh?
Verse 10.
Yeah, verse 10.
Can you read it?
Yeah.
But his sons shall be stirred up and shall assemble a multitude of great forces. One shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up, even to his fortress.
So what's it describing?
The sons of the guy who was killed by Ptolemy when Berenice was murdered. So it actually, because the verse starts with the word but, tells you there's even more behind that.
Right.
That you have to go back to.
You have to keep going back forth.
Yeah,
back.
but one of the sons, the younger, was the weaker one, and he died or was killed by the generals. The older one went down against Egypt.
Okay. So in the first three words, what did the first three words teach us? But his sons, and you just kind of covered some of that. The sons here, it's describing the king of the north, and in those first few words, what details can we learn? The first thing that we can notice that's unusual is that there's two sons. So at this waymark, the king of the north is represented by two people, and we have that in verse 10 here. And it's, I don't know if we covered the date, but it's 222 BC. And there's two sons here. So at this waymark, the king of the north is represented by two people. This is Seleucus, Cyrenius, and Antiochus Magnus. These two brothers. While we're on that subject, we need to make one point about noise. Raphia is Antiochus III, but it's Ptolemy IV Philopator that comes against him. When it comes to our history, what kings are we saying fight at Raphia and Panium? Trump and Putin in our history. No one line gives us every detail. They're not always the same time spans or people. In 1989, the people are different, but it's still the king of the north and the king of the south. So we know at Raphia, you're going to see Trump and Putin. Panium, it's Trump and Putin. But over here, it's still the king of the north and the king of the south, but it's different people. It's Reagan and George Bush, the two sons, representing the king of the north. We've identified that at this waymark, verse 10, that there's two sons. They both assemble a great multitude, and then they overflow and pass through and go to the fortress, to the borders of Egypt. But they don't go into Egypt. The application is 1989, and it's 222 BC. Who are these two sons? When we get to 1989, this war between the Soviet Union and the United States, we can mark two presidents, Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr. It's between the two of them that they form this multitude and are engaged in war. But it says one shall come, so it's just one of them that uses this army and takes down the King of the South. Because in 1989, we are in an election cycle. And what did we do in Acts 27 at the time of the end? Who did we mark in Caesarea at the time of the end? In Acts 27? Yeah, you guys are cheating though too, huh? But that's something you might have remembered it. But yeah, it's on the notes, I know. So Felix and Festus were marked in at the time of the end from the story of the ship. By marking a president and a vice president, we're also marking a co-rulership. In Acts 27, we marked Felix and Festus. At the time of the end, I had forgotten about that until, I know I've read this before, but I'd forgotten about that George Bush Sr. was his vice president, and then he became president. Totally forgot that. Hey, how good, I'm not alone. I totally forgot that. And I've read this several times and gone through this, and I totally forgot that. So at the time of the end, we see a president who's also, okay, there's co-rulership. At Acts 27, we marked Felix and Festus. At the time of the end, we see a transition in leadership in the King of the North. And this is 1989. In this history, it's Seleucus that builds the army, but it's Antiochus that used it against the King of the South. So Seleucus builds the army, but it's Antiochus that uses it. So it's Reagan that builds the army, and it's Bush that uses it. When we come to Reagan and Bush, it's Reagan that goes into the alliance and does all that work, but it's Bush who's in 1989 to 1981 that actually sees the completion of that process. So we'll go back and find out why they fought before this in verse 6 to 8. So we're continuing the process of going backwards to find out why the King of the North and the King of the South have this battle. So they are fighting in Panium. We see that they fight here at Raphia. We saw that they fight here. We're going to back up again. And when we keep going further, I'm not good at the board, so we're going to jump down a little bit to when we get to the end. So Daniel 11, 6 to 8. And in the end of the years, they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. But out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them, and shall prevail. And shall also carry captives into Egypt their gods with their princes, and with their precious vessels of silver and gold. And he shall continue more years than the king of the north. Right. So we'll paraphrase these verses simply. The king of the north and the king of the south are in an alliance. They make an agreement. The king of the south's daughter marries the king of the north. That agreement is broken. The alliance ends. So the king of the south comes against the king of the north and defeats him. This is where we mark that he goes into the fortress. This history is known as the Laodicean Wars. And we have that back here, the Laodicean Wars. It was Berenice, the daughter of Ptolemy, that married the king of the north. They go into this alliance. The king of the north puts away his wife Laodice, and he marries Ptolemy's daughter, Berenice. He begins to miss his former wife, so he brings her back. Fearing that she'll be put away again, she poisons him, Berenice, and their child. So they have this alliance, and it's broken. And it's her brother who takes revenge and comes against the king of the north. That's described in verse 7. That in retaliation for her murder, he attacks the king of the north, goes into his fortress and defeats him. What history is this? in our time. Well, not our time, but looking at the history of 1798. We're going to call it the Laodicean Wars on our line. Laodicean Wars on our line. This is the history and application of 1798. In 1796, France invaded the Papal States and defeated the Papal army. They then went into a treaty or an alliance. The King of the North violated that alliance, which the King of the South, France, used as the reason to march into Rome, proclaim a republic, and take the Pope captive. So it begins with an alliance. That alliance is broken, and then the King of the South defeats the King of the North. This lines up with 246 BC. So we've got back here where the Laodicean, not Laodicean, Laodicean Wars is 246 BC, and it marks 1798 in our time, the taking captive of the Pope. And I don't think I marked here though, but each one we're marking along the way, that in Panium, and I think we already know that, that's where the King of the South is defeated. So it's a victory for the King of the North. At Raphia, it's victory for the King of the South. 1989 is victory for the King of the North. Back in 1798, it's victory for the King of the South. So in 1797, it's known as the Treaty of Tolentino, and this is when there is a treaty or peace made between France and the papacy. Going back to the story of here, this is the treaty that's in this history, the Treaty of Tolentino. And where peace is made between France and the papacy. In 1798, the papal army killed one of their generals of the French army, just like their Berenice was killed. And it's used as an excuse for France to invade the Papal States. So backing up one more, and this is where I'm going to run out of room, and I brought it down to here. This would be the Laodicean Wars, 1798-246, and a victory for the King of the South. And the King of the South shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him, and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. If anybody feels that they can't do this, I have to tell you, I'm probably the slowest learner, but I just connect more dots by doing this, but that great dominion, I just never connected my own self. I'm slow to figure things out, but that great dominion was in here. I feel like I'm ignorant sometimes on these things, but it's like so many pieces of the puzzle got to be put together to make it all be, like I was describing to some people, like a movie played before you, so you can see it in real time and connect it in your own mind. So really participating and taking the notes is so helpful to better understand it. So in verse 4, it goes from the death of Alexander the Great to 4 generals. Verse 5 goes from 4 generals to 2 generals. It starts talking about Cassander and Lysimachus, and from verse 5, it's only a story of Seleucus and Ptolemy. It's describing how they began. It says the King of the South is strong, and who is the King of the South? Ptolemy's the King of the South. Is that what you said? Oh, yeah. Okay. Ptolemy has a prince, in reality, a general. It's describing a general, and this general of the King of the South is going to be stronger than he is. He's going to have a bigger empire and more power. That general is Seleucus. So literally in that history, Seleucus was a general of Ptolemy. And I think we all remember from way back when, seems like a long time ago, but where you had the north, east, south, and west. You had Seleucus down here, and I do remember that from my studies Ptolemy, sorry. You had Ptolemy here. And that Seleucus was a general of him, and then he goes up to take the east. So so he began under Ptolemy. And the general of the King's house is going to be stronger than he is. He's going to have a bigger empire and more power. That general is Seleucus. So literally in that history, Seleucus was a general of Ptolemy. So remember, the idea is that we're going back to understand how they're battle began, the king of the north and the king of the south. So we're seeing that Seleucus was actually a general of Ptolemy, continuing going backwards. The general is Seleucus. So literally in that history, Seleucus was a general of Ptolemy who was then given Babylon and began to establish the Seleucid Empire. In application, when it says his dominion shall be a great dominion, what do we describe that dominion to be? We say it's the 1260, the great dominion, where the king of the north is more powerful than the king of the south, and he's going to rule with great power. We would say 538 to 1798 is that great dominion. The point we need to come to in doing this, the main reason, it's we understand Raphia and Panium. We understand this prior history, but why are they fighting? Because they started out as allies, as we can see. Seleucus was a general of Ptolemy. They started out as allies, and somewhere in their history, they began to fight over Coal Syria. This is what they're fighting over, that territory. We need to understand where that all began. Where that begins is verse 4. We won't read it in the verse. We have to go to Wikipedia. Wikipedia will tell us that this tension between the king of the north and the king of the south began at the Battle of Ipsus, what we've been discussing for the last couple of classes. We need to make a point. We need to make the point. We talked a lot about Raphia, but even from the perspective of Seleucus and Ptolemy, ignoring Pyrrhus and Demetrius, there is no Raphia in Panium without Ipsus. And what happened at the Battle of Ipsus? There was an alliance of 4 generals, Seleucus, Ptolemy, Cassander, and Lysimachus. Just before they fought that battle, Ptolemy heard word that it had been lost. While still being in alliance and supporting the others, he never came and fought himself. What that battle looks like was Antigonus against Seleucus and Cassander and Lysimachus. Antigonus was killed, and when he was killed, his empire was divided up between these 3. Seleucus, and always remember that Seleucus was a general of Ptolemy, who then was given Babylon and began the Seleucid Empire. Seleucus was given Coal Syria. Before he could take control of that region, Ptolemy went up and took it for himself. It was not Ptolemy's to take, but he took it anyway. Because these men were friends, Seleucus never fought him over it. So Coal Syria, and you guys have a map there's a map on the screen for those on there, but I'm not going to draw. I'm not very good at maps, so. But the area of Coal Syria was to be given to Ptolemy. Did I say that right? It was given to Seleucus. Coal Syria was given to Seleucus, but before he could go take control of it, Ptolemy went and took it. So there should have been a battle, but because they're friends, Seleucus never fought him over it. He let him keep it. But when those 2 kings died, their children fought for it for many years. So the 6 Syrian wars are their descendants fighting over Coal Syria. They didn't fight over it. But it began at the Battle of Ipsus. We spoke at the beginning of our class on Ipsus, but we need to be able to look at one battle or history from more than one perspective. If we could take a picture of something, we might see, we can have this picture on this card. It's the same card, but you can look at it from one angle and see one picture, and you could look at it from another angle and see another picture. I can think to describe that. I have to be careful because we're online, but because my son gave me one of those pictures. He's not walking with us right now. Pray for him. Pray for my kids, all of our kids. But he gave me a gift of one of those pictures of Jesus where it shows 3 different images. Did you know what I'm saying? Well, I don't know what you call it. But when you walk down the hallway, the holograph, you see one, then you see another, and then you see another. So you're looking at it from different perspectives, and you're seeing different things. So we can look at it from the history of Pyrrhus and Demetrius, but if we take it from this other perspective of Seleucus and Ptolemy, Now you have a different perspective. It's the king of the north, Seleucus. He's going into battle with Antigonus. Antigonus is like the ancestor, the same person. Because you remember it was we're looking at Pyrrhus, we're seeing Demetrius and Antigonus against the three allies. But in this story, we're seeing it as Seleucus going into battle with Antigonus. Antigonus is like the ancestor, the same person, but Antigonus is fighting Seleucus. And who isn't at that battle that is supporting Seleucus? Ptolemy didn't come. Now we have a different perspective in 2016. In one perspective, we have Pyrrhus supporting Demetrius, trying to take over these three allies. But from this other perspective of the battle, who is taking down Antigonus? Hillary Clinton. This is one perspective of Ipsos. Who is the king of the north? So it's interesting. It's like I really have to think that through, because we have Hillary Clinton now taking down. Did I read that right? Yeah, Hillary Clinton taking down Antigonus. This is one perspective of Ipsos, huh? We're going to keep reading. We're looking at the story from another perspective to learn another angle of this. That's why I was saying earlier that it was interesting, and I'm anxious to go to the next studies to continue this thought through. This is one perspective of Ipsos. Who was the king of the north? Demetrius. Who's the king of the south? Pyrrhus. We can take it to a different history. Now it's not a story of Demetrius and Pyrrhus. Now we're understanding why Raphia happens in the first place. It happens because of the Battle of Ipsos. Now it's a history of Seleucus and Ptolemy. And in this first battle, they're not enemies like in the 6 Syrian wars. They're allies. So remember that they were allies who fought that battle together to take out Antigonus, right? Antigonus, who is like the ancestor. I'm sorry, I skipped a part there. They're on the same side, taking down a common enemy, Antigonus. So, okay, so come back to 2016. Who's fighting Clinton? From this perspective, Trump and Putin are fighting Clinton. And from this perspective, who has 400 elephants? Who has the new mode of warfare? Mm-hmm. Because she's not using the new mode of warfare. Now it's Seleucus. Now it's Trump. We make a big deal about Putin uses this disinformation and lies, but I think we're a little harsh on Putin. Those elephants didn't come from Ptolemy. We can't blame Putin for Trump's Twitter feed. This happened with America to themselves, within America to themselves. I think we blame too much on Putin, but if we're willing to understand elephants is a new mode of warfare, then who's wielding that weapon in 2016? Huh? The Twitter gun? He's pretty deadly with it. I kind of zoomed through this one. We're almost done.
It wasn't just Twitter. He
Yes.
Didn't Tess teach that didn't Hillary try to purchase some sort of software from Obama and put that in it, or something that he used to get some sort of
voting success in his election?
No, his software. He had some sort of analytical software that helped him figure out where he was going to win, where he wasn't going to.
Obama or Trump? Because you said
Obama.
Obama. Okay.
Trump had some too, but he had it from a different source. So Trump had an IT guru who literally predicted every electoral vote that he was going to get before the election.
It's like an algorithm.
Yeah, it was an algorithm the guy came up with, and Obama had some sort of algorithm too that he would not let Hillary use. So Hillary didn't have the same resources that Obama had and that Trump had against her. And I think Tess taught that in her presentation.
Man, Obama shot himself in the foot like I've never seen in my life.
Well,
I don't understand how Hillary can be taking down Antigonus if Hillary and Antigonus are the same person.
Hey, I still have a lot to learn too. And I'm looking forward to next week's study.
Shooting himself in the head.
Yeah, I don't have all the answers. I tell you, I'm still learning it as I go too.
it's like Putin helping Trump. It's going to come back to hurt Putin, he doesn't see it. He doesn't see it happening. Doesn't come back on.
Is it because of Gaddafi? Where she made
Oh,
the
that was
mistake?
brought up last night, wasn't it? Brought up last night
Yeah,
by somebody? Where he said never again in his revenge against her.
yeah. So she made a decision that ended up bringing her down in the election, which she kind of caused the fall of Antigonus, then, her own power.
I still have a whole lot to learn myself.
We thought that George Washington, the end of the beginning is Donald Trump, the two richest people. And now they're saying
Washington's
Oh yeah, totally different, huh?
Washington's Hillary too, so symbols can have more than one meaning.
It's a matter of looking at the story from different perspectives, just like taking the, when you're looking at parables, you can look at it through the compare and contrast, through the juxtaposition, through the repeat and enlarge, and understanding what the parable in each one of the lines teaches us a different piece of information. And so I too am still learning it myself. I truly don't have all the answers at all. But there's more that we need to add to the story, but we need to do a little bit more slowly in another study. So join us on Sabbath, I guess, as we continue through these classes. We've been blessed by going through them. I pray to be able to retain, but I'm also thankful that the Lord says he'll recall to our minds too, because it is a lot of information. But having taken it, I think most of us can be this way. I know I am, that if the project looks too big, I don't have the mindset to take that project and take it one piece at a time and get it done. I like a project done in overnight and be out of my way. And but this is a project that we kind of took on because we can't go to these schools. We can't be in one of these long-term ones. So we took it on to do weekly, go through it as if we were there, and it really has helped. And so going forward, the studies are going to go cover more of this. So to give us a little more evidence of why we can do this, I'm sure some people have noticed that if we take this battle back to Ipsus and make application, we're saying 2016. This is where it gets kind of complicated, and I may not be able to describe it completely. And I did not put this one on the board. And I don't want to attempt to draw it out right now because I've made a mess of the board. Maybe I'll try and do something later so that people can see it, or anybody. I don't know. We're going to post the notes with the when you post the videos. Well, then we'll put the videos on our sites where we can put the notes, or you can put the notes on yours if you want to too. Yeah, I think I figured out how to do it. In the description, you just put notes are posted at and you put the websites, and then they can find the notes. Because this particular one that you're all seeing here, other than if you zoomed in on my notes, I can do that. Can they see it if you did that? No? Okay, so it just takes this and breaks it down every more, and I can't really do it because I don't have enough room up top here. But we're going all the way back to 301 to Ipsus. And that's kind of what I started to do down here. But we're going to go all the way back to Ipsus. But she's talking about all this period of time in here being noise all the way up to Raphia. So to me, I can't even explain it well, but I'm going to read what she said, and prayerfully we all can come to understand it, because why we're skipping that history and putting it where we are. So some people have noticed that we take us all the way back to Ipsus and make application. So we're saying 2016, skipping all this history and saying that without 2016, there's no Raphia. We're skipping this history and could just be saying it's all just noise. We can give stronger logic for why we're doing this and of why we can skip this history and identify Ipsus as 2016 that leads us to Raphia. So when you're talking about, and I don't have it up here anymore, but when you're talking about where we had the board, where we had 1989, 2014, 2016, 2019, and Ipsus is here, we're taking history, this history here, that wouldn't naturally be in that lead up to it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And if anybody else understands it a little bit better, feel free to jump in. So it's a jump to Raphia from 301 to 217. there's history that is jumped over. Some may want to try reapplying these verses and saying they've happened between 2016 and 2019. 538 is verse 5. Verse 6 to 8 is 538 to 1798. So that actually is the end of this study. And the next one will start, as far as I know, going into breaking more of that down and trying to better understand this application, because this particular application that she's making, I don't know that I fully grasp yet either. So again, I don't know how much time I went through here for you, but that's all for this one. Last night went longer, so. But anyway, so shall we pray? Gracious Father in heaven, Lord, we are thankful for what we do understand, and we look to you for the things we yet need to learn and understand. We're thankful for your mercy and your grace. We're thankful for the Sabbath day. Father, we just want to praise you and thank you for the work that you're doing in us. And we're so grateful for your mercy and your tender loving care as you walk us through these things. And truly, Father, though time is short, you are giving us time to absorb these things. And I pray that each and every one of us, that we would have a hunger and a thirst to have this understanding. As we know, Father, coming up to November 9, it's not so much the date, it's understanding what it represents. And this is what this is developing. And I pray that each one of us would truly take on the exercise of handling these lines ourselves, of going through and drawing out the lines and going through the histories so that we can internalize these things ourselves and have the view, Father, we need to have, as if it were a movie being played before our eyes, that we could fully grasp and understand, that we could be ready soldiers, Father, as we go into this battle that is coming, that we would go in with the faith of Jesus. I pray for each one of us, Father, that we not look to what we can't do, but we look to what you can do through us when we surrender to thee. And that this battle, Father, as the children of Israel were getting ready to go into Canaan, that we would look at it as Caleb and Joshua did, that we would see it as we are well able to go up against these giants. And that we know, Father, that this is not our battle, this is your battle. I just pray that each one of us would join with our whole hearts this army and be used by you. And we know, Father, that you didn't choose us because we can do this. You chose us because we can't. Therefore, your name and you would be glorified in us. What a privilege and a blessing to be a part of such a work. We praise you, Lord, and we thank you, and we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay.